My name is Lisa Kyriakides. I'm the Handbell director at Aurora United Church. I ring in our quintet EmBellished. I'm a member of the Bronze Foundation. I'm the Central Area Rep for OGEHR, and I'm the Secretary for the Handbell Musicians of Canada. So I'm just going to switch to my PowerPoint. I want you to note that on the bottom of every slide you'll find my name and email. You can use that anytime to reach out to me. Today we're going to talk about finding the melody in your score. We're going to do some 101 detective work. The first thing we need to talk about is what is melody. So dictionary.com has 3 definitions. Number 1, musical sounds in agreeable succession or arrangement. Number 2, the succession of single tones in musical compositions as distinguished from harmony and rhythm. And number 3, a rhythmical succession of single tones producing a distinct musical phrase or idea. If we combine all this, we really need to emphasize the fact that a melody is a succession of single tones that create a distinct musical idea. In contrast to that, what is harmony? Harmony is any simultaneous combination of tones. The main difference between melody and harmony is single tones in succession. Harmony is 2 or more tones played at exactly the same time. That's how we create harmony. So why do we need to know where the melody is? Why do our conductors sometimes ask us if we are part of the melody, or everybody put their hands up who is part of the melody? Why are we talking about this melody thing? First reason, probably the most important reason, is that melody notes are performed differently than harmony notes. They may have different dynamics, the shape of the line, the rhythmic motifs, the style, the techniques that are used. The second one is to figure out how your notes fit into the musical statement of the piece. So you need to know if you're even included in this musical statement. The next reason is to understand if both your hands are playing melody or harmony notes, or if they're switching back and forth. And we're going to talk about that later on in this presentation, if you have that instance where you have both melody and harmony. When you're part of the melody, you're making music with your fellow ringers as part of that melodic statement. You need to know, who am I working with in this musical line? So as long as you know where the melody is, you can tell who your fellow ringers are that are participating in this melody with you. And very pragmatically, if you're a 5 or 6 octave choir, you need to understand how to double the melody when you are instructed to do so. All right. How do composers help us with this? How do they indicate the melody so that it's easier to find? The first and probably the most obvious one is that they label it. I've just put a blue box around that little bracket that says MEL inside of it. Obviously, that's short form for melody. So Derek Hakes has indicated that that C5 note starts off the melody. The other thing that composers use are the things that I have bracketed in the green square. These are called voice leading lines, and they indicate when the melody is moving from clef to clef. You'll see that it's employed quite a bit in these 6 measures. I've indicated the melody for you there in the mauve line. You'll notice that it moves from clef to clef, and those voice leading lines help us with that. Another way that composers can indicate melody is through stem direction. First off, I've just put in a red square here. You can see that arranger Anna Laura Page has made it really simple for us and has labeled melody, not even in short form, written out the whole word there. I've also indicated the melody with the blue line, and you will note that all of the notes that I've indicated with the blue line have their stems going up, all in the same direction. But if you take a look at the rest of the treble clef notes in those measures, all those notes are stems going down. So this is how the composer has indicated where the melody is versus where the harmony is. A composer can also change the timbre or the sound of the melody, and one way we do this in bells, of course, is to move it into chimes. This is what Kevin McChesney has done in this piece. I've indicated it with the green line. It is all played in chimes. you can see that it moves between clefs and those voice leading lines are being used. And this will really make the melody pop because it's played by a different sounding instrument. Something else the composer can do is use different techniques between the harmony and the melody to make the melody stand out. So in this piece, I've indicated the melody in red. You can see that the melody moves from treble clef at the top, then treble clef at the bottom, and then it moves into the bass clef. And we have those voice leading lines to help us follow where it's going. In this case, the melody is completely rung, no matter what clef it's in, but everything else that happens in most of these measures is thumb damped. So there's a big difference between how we're going to hear that melody rung and how we're going to hear the harmony all thumb damped. So Richard McKee is using different techniques to highlight that melody. Another thing composers do is to double the melody using octave doubling so that there's much more emphasis on the melody. I've indicated the melody with the green line, and then you can see that it's doubled again with the red line so that it's one octave apart. So it's heard in two different octaves, giving it more emphasis, more, and likely heard much better by the listener. So as a ringer, what things do we have to watch out for now that we know how to find our melody? The biggest one, and I've referred to this earlier, is that your bells are involved in both melody and harmony, and they switch back and forth. We can't just look at our notes in isolation. We need to look at them in the bigger picture as a ringer, and one of those things, of course, is through melody. If you'll look at measure 9, which I've highlighted with the red box, I'm looking specifically at the E-flat 6 player. I've highlighted their notes in that measure. The first occurrence of that on B1 is a melody note. In this case, the melody is stems up in the treble clef, and that note is part of the melody. On beat 2 and, however, we are going to ring that E-flat again, but in this case, it's a stems down and is part of the harmony. So those two occurrences are very different, and they're even more different if you look at the techniques that are required to play them, which I've also highlighted. When you play the melody, you're going to ring that note. If you're part of the harmony, you're going to use the technique of let vibrate. So those two instances of the E-flat 6 in that measure 9 are going to be played quite differently. And another example, of course, is in measure 10 with the green box. And this time I'm looking at the C6 player. And they have two successive notes, one right after the other. The first one is a stems down, so it's a harmony note and would be included in the let vibrate. The next occurrence of that note, which is just on beat 1 and, is a melody note. It's got a stem up, and therefore it would be part of the ring technique. And so these performers need to know which is which so that they can play these notes differently. This occurs, obviously, in this example. I've given you some upper treble people that would be looking at this. This also happens in the battery quite a bit, where battery members, especially at the upper battery, where they move back and forth between harmony and melody. But it can happen to any ringer in the choir, so it's definitely something to watch out for. Another thing to watch out for is that we can't assume that the melody is always in the top with the high treble bells. And in fact, when I pick music, I often look for pieces where the melody is somewhere other than in the top treble bells, because I think it gives more interest and it allows my lower pitched ringers to have a chance to play melody. So in this example, Thine is the Glory, arranged by Margaret Tucker, a lovely hymn. I've indicated the melody here with the mauve line. You can see that it's actually mostly in the bass clef. It's in the top of the bass clef most of the time. That's where the melody is. You'll notice that as you get into measure 47, it very briefly moves into the treble clef. Again, there's the use of those voice leading lines. And so if you look at measure 47 in isolation and you are the E-flat 5 player, your very first note, because you have two E-flats in that measure, two half-note E-flats, your very first note is going to be part of the melody. And your second note on beat 3 is going to be part of the harmony. Again, you need to play those two notes differently. You need to understand that the first one, you're going to be with the other ringers who are part of the melody. You need to make it sound like, you're a unified group, that it's really only one person playing the melody. And then when you are on the third beat in that measure, you're going to need to play as a harmony person and fit in with the other people who are playing harmony. Another thing to watch out for is octave doubling. We talked about octave doubling earlier, and often that second octave can be quite buried in chords. So if you look at this piece, We Gather Together, lovely hymn, again, it's very chordal, like the chords move together, and the second octave is kind of buried. So there's the first octave, the melody is at the top again, indicated with the burgundy line, and then the blue line indicates the octave doubling. And so as you can see, if you follow it along, it's quite buried in those chords. And as a ringer, you might not even notice that your note is part of the melody. So you need to know where the upper melody is in order to know if you're part of that octave double. If you look at measure 12, there's a perfect example of a ringer who has to change between melody and harmony and might not even realize it unless they realize what the melody is. If you look at the C5 player in measure 12 in the bass clef, the top of the bass clef, they have 3 C5s in a row. The first C5 is harmony. The second C5 is melody. And the third C5 is harmony. So that ringer probably, if they don't know where the melody is, they would just ring all 3 of those C5s equally. However, that shouldn't happen because that second C5 on beat 2 is part of the melody. And so there has to be an effort to ring it differently so that it matches what the other melody ringers are doing. So if you don't know where the melody is and what the melody is, you won't know to do that in that measure. All right, so hopefully this has given you some tips on how to recognize melody and why it's important to know where the melody is as you are performing your piece, so that as an ensemble you can really do justice to that melody when you're ringing together. I hope that you will join me in the Q&A that follows this tutorial. See you then. Thanks.